Welcome to the Watchdog with me, Lowkey, on Mint Press. As usual, we are going against the grain with real investigative journalism. And because of that, we need your support. So please like, subscribe, and share this video, but also support us through the Patreon in whatever way you can. This week, we are honored to be joined by the investigative journalist, Juan McEvoy. John, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Karina. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks for joining us. I'm a big fan of your work. To start off with, I just wanted to get an idea of the trajectory towards investigative journalism. How was it, and how did you become the person you are today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I kind of entered journalism in a bit of an unorthodox way. To be honest, I wasn't even that much intending to become a journalist. I'd just published something about British involvement in Colombia, like an academic paper, and I just sent it to, once it got published, I just sent it to a number of different outlets, and those outlets included The Guardian, The Independent, and a number of independent ones as well, and also sent it to people like Mark Curtis, who I thought, foremost British historian of British foreign policy in the second. And unsurprisingly, The Guardian is a trend that I've noticed since publishing this paper. The Guardian didn't seem interested, just as it hasn't seemed very much interested in a number of cases of British involvement in Latin America. They haven't, published anything on British involvement in Venezuela or the recent evidence that are published of British involvement in the coup in Chile in 1973. But one of the papers that did respond to me was The Canary. The global editor of The Canary at the time got back to me, said, this is interesting. Would you like to start writing? And I just said yes. So I got into it that way, really. And I think like a lot of people at that time, I was politically interested, but not particularly politically active. I was working 2 jobs out in Canada, and I wasn't sufficiently, I don't think, aware of the kind of editorial constraints that are put on the type of reporting that I wanted to do. And it soon became apparent that independent media was pretty much the only place that was gonna allow publications on anti-imperialism and on British foreign policy in Latin America, and basically reflecting what Britain's real role in the world was. So, I mean, obviously, since then, I've published in a lot of different places, including Brazil Wire or Declassified UK, and I mean the trend has just continued. Like if you want to report truthfully on Britain's real role in the world, you're almost certainly not going to get any attention from the corporate media. I mean, the Guardian is a good example because it's what you'd expect on the liberal end of the corporate media. So there's very little chance that they're going to report honestly about what's going on in Latin America.
I think a key part of war against left media in this country has been the campaign against the Canary. And there's a particular aspect of that campaign that you picked out in your article, looking at the influence of an organization which goes by the name of Stop Funding Fake News, and how it had some influence on the downsizing which had to take place in the Canary. Can you tell us a bit about Stop Funding Fake News?
Yeah, so I mean, before the 2019 general election in the UK, that, as we all know, Labour lost, there was a campaign that was mounted against media organisations in the UK, and this campaign was called Stop Funding Fake News. What I proposed to do was to try to demonetise independent news websites by pressuring certain companies to remove their advertisement. However, I did a statistical analysis of who this campaign was actually targeting, and to be sure, it was targeting to a certain degree certain right-wing news organisations. But the vast majority of its attempts to demonetise the website was The Canary. It was roughly 60%, I believe, more targeted than any of these other websites, and especially more than the right-wing websites. So what it seemed to me was basically a thinly veiled censorship campaign against left-wing media in the UK, and particularly the Canary. So it's quite a cynical operation, and it gets more cynical still when you consider who was actually behind it. So Stop Funding Fake News, it became apparent, was a campaign orchestrated by the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. Now, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate lists as its only patron as Rachel Riley of Countdown fame, who masquerades as, as an anti-racist campaigner. But I feel like that it's a very cynical way of acting for someone who has, who said on Mastermind, "I don't look like your typical kind of Jew," and has made all sorts of abhorrent remarks in the past as well. So Rachel Riley is listed as the only patron of CCDH. However, CCDH's first director was Morgan McSweeney. Morgan McSweeney was, up until recently, because he's clearly been doing a pretty shockingly terrible job, he was Keir Starmer's campaign director. So the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, directed by McSweeney, was linked to this Stop Funding Fake News campaign at the time that it was targeting the Canary. So what we've got this kind of cynical, supposedly counter-disinformation campaign that's trying to shut down and censor independent left-wing media in the UK, and with direct lines back to the right of the Labour Party. I mean, these links get even stronger when you consider that the Labour campaign group called Labour Together, which is it's supposedly a kind of a liberal side of the Labour Party campaign to make Labour more accommodating to the middle class. This campaign group, Labour Together, is funded by the likes of the pro-Israel lobbyist Trevor Chin. And once again, who did Trevor Chin fund during the leadership campaign? Keir Starmer. So when Keir Starmer was refusing to publish the full details of his campaign donors during the leadership election, and this was the subject of a lot of media attention, and eventually, I found that once the statutory limit of publishing your campaign donors had reached its limit, Keir Starmer eventually, after he'd won the election, revealed that he'd received £50,000 from the pro-Israel lobbyist Trevor Chin. Among its other directors, Elisa Nandy, of course, who is now the shadow foreign secretary. So you've got a wide array of prominent Labour figures, and I feel like that story should have been more widely reported, really, because it. I mean, how often is it that you get a party-affiliated organisation that's actively trying to shut down a press organisation? So it was quite shocking. More recently as well, I'm not sure if you saw this, but I mean, there was recent furore over Sally Rooney engaging with BDS and refusing to publish a Hebrew version of her book with an Israeli publishing company that was linked to the Israeli Defense Forces. So, so there was a lot of media attention, why Sally Rooney is supposedly an anti-Semite, and the typical nonsense that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, especially. Now, in the Times, one of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate senior investigators published a piece accusing Sally Rooney of anti-Semitism because of her very principled decision not to publish the book with a publishing company linked to the IDF. So what I feel like you've seen some thread start to unravel with regards to the CCDH now. Is it against countering digital hate, or is it more against censoring ideas that certain vested interests would not like to be published? And I think that's even more important when you consider that the CCDH lists on its website that it doesn't publish who is funding it, where any of its money is coming from, apart from Rachel Riley, which is just fairly absurd, to be honest. But if you look at its company's house, look at its basically its finances by company's house, it's doing fairly well financially, and it's often got job posts And some of the jobs listed or advertised by CCDH have a salary of £45,000. So this isn't a minor operation. This is being funded from somewhere. I imagine it's not being solely funded. Well, it's clear it's not being solely funded by Rachel Riley. So it'd be very interesting to see if they could publish who's actually funding them, so that we can see if they're genuinely a campaign against digital hate, as they propose to be, or something far more sinister. I think the latter is more likely, given that they won't publish it.
Absolutely. And also, a key part of this is that the CCDH, it shares its address with Labour Together, which you mentioned. Trevor Chin is not only a funder of, he's also a director of Labour Together. And Trevor Chin is a senior official within the formal Zionist movement. He's a lobbyist from BICOM, the Israel Lobby Group. And also, you've seen Martin Taylor fund the Labour Together group. And this is someone who was intimately involved in the PFI policies, which have eviscerated the NHS across the country and society at large. If you could also tell me about Imran Ahmed, who is also linked to this organization. What's his role and what's his connection to the Labour Party?
Yeah, I think it's important to go back very briefly on the role of Trevor Chin really in British politics. So as you said, he's one of the major funders of Labour Together. He's funded Keir Starmer's leadership campaign with £50,000. He's funded Lisa Nandy. So you've got this this kind of pro lobby who is simultaneously funding the Labour Party chair of the Palestine Solidarity campaign. Like, something's not quite right there. And Lisa Nandy has been widely reported to have basically ground the Palestine Solidarity, or the Labour Friends of Palestine organisation, to the ground. Its website has barely been active during the time that she was running it. So it's very important to question what the degree to which Lisa Nandy's solidarity with Palestine actually stands. Now back to Trevor Chin, because I think it's important to recall what BICOM's role is and was in British society. Now, it's often to bring leading British journalists over to Israel and to be basically given a tailored tour and to pamper British journalists so that their output on Israel and Israel and Israeli government policies is perhaps more charitable than it deserves. And of course, in the UK, we know that BICOM, if ever there's, let's say, BBC reporting on Israel that appears to be critical of its policies, such as murdering children, BICOM has been known to contact leading media organisations and make sure that that this reporting is edited in a way that is more charitable, once again, to Israel. So Trevor Chin's involvement, or Trevor Chin's, indirect association with these organisations is very important, because it's quite clear that these are also information operations that are targeting organisations such as the Canary that are critical of Israel's policies. So you can see direct kind of a correlation between the funding, the individuals involved, and who's getting targeted. And it's usually those, as you well know, who stand in solidarity with Palestine against an apartheid state. But just to go back to Imran Ahmed, who you asked about, he has a long history of organising also with members of the Labour right. He was for a long time associated with Angela Eagle, who, as we know, ran a failed leadership contest against Jeremy Corbyn as one of the numerous coups that he suffered, and a number of other figures on the Labour right, I believe, like Liz Kendall, who I think he ran communications for her when she got like 6% of the vote in the leadership contest. So I mean, he's perhaps not the most effective actor, but he's certainly involved in a lot of campaigns that are politically associated with the right wing of the Labour Party.
And also, importantly, Imran Ahmed is on the steering committee for the government's Commission for Countering Extremism. So it's in this way that we see these actors who work in sort of curating what are the parameters of political expression and interrogation, really, and investigation within our society. We have so much to talk about, along with the war against the left in this country. There's also a hybrid war against Venezuela. If you could just break down some of the elements of that hybrid war for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Venezuela has been a key target of a hybrid war. I mean, especially since Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998. What Hugo Chavez tried to do in Venezuela was to kind of structurally change the social and economic character of the country in a way that was preferable not to the Venezuelan oligarchy that has long existed, but to use its massive wealth for the benefit of the wider population, and especially for the benefit of an incredibly racialized population, such as there's a large population of Afro-Venezuelans as well as indigenous population, had historically been totally excluded from the political process. So you have a shift in economic but also political representation in Venezuela during the Bolivarian revolution of Chavez. Now, since Chavez died in 2013 and Maduro took power, this hybrid war has been intensified in a number of different ways. It's important to remember that under the Obama administration, Venezuela was designated as a national security threat. On what basis, it's not quite clear, but was designated as a national security threat to the US, which paved the way for the brutal sanctions regime that Venezuela is suffering at the moment. According to the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights impact of unilateral coercive sanctions, Venezuela's national income is at 1% of what it was prior to sanctions. Now, that, sitting in Britain, that's almost an incomprehensible asphyxiation of an economy. I don't think we can quite grasp the extent to which Venezuela's economy has been crushed by this sanctions regime that supposedly allows humanitarian elements to still come into, but companies, organizations, aid of secondary sanctions, that certain humanitarian aid is being restricted anyway. And as we've seen recently in the case of Alex Saab, a Colombian national but now Venezuelan diplomat who was basically in charge of negotiating to bring food into Venezuela, because, of course, one of the chief political objectives of the US and of Britain is to starve the Venezuelan population into submission so that it changes its own government rather than the US getting its hands dirty in a kind of in any form of direct military intervention. So Alex Saab has now been detained in Cape Verde for a while. He's now been extradited to the US, where he'll probably suffer some horrendous treatment and put into a supermax, similarly to what Julian Assange might await if he's also extradited. So what's Britain's role in all of this? Britain supporting the coup efforts. The coup efforts that really intensified in January 2019 when Juan Guaidó pronounced himself Venezuelan president, even though he'd never ran for presidential office in his life, even though 1 in 5 Venezuelans knew who he actually was. So Britain was one of the first countries to recognise Juan Guaidó. According to John Bolton, it did so under US pressure. And Britain shortly after froze roughly $2 billion worth of Venezuelan gold in the Bank of England. It's the case of the Venezuelan gold in the Bank of England is quite interesting and particularly disgusting. I mean, if you take into account, for example, that in 2018, Venezuela's total cost or the total value of medical and food imports to Venezuela was 2.4 billion. Then Britain has basically removed, that the equivalent amount of a whole year's worth of medical and food imports, which within a wider context of suffocating sanctions is tantamount to institutionalized murder. So Britain has frozen, and this is going through the courts at the moment. what's quite interesting is that Juan Guaido's legal fees in the UK have been paid to a powerhouse US legal firm with historic connections to wide parts of the Latin American right, with money expropriated from the Venezuelan state in the US. So basically, money that has been stolen by the US government has been given to Juan Guaidó, who is then giving it to a legal firm to fight his legal battle in the UK in order to steal even more money from the Venezuelan state. So you've got this kind of compound theft that's going on that I think is actually quite rare in the history of British foreign policy. I mean, it's not direct plunder. It's this like these layers of institutions and indirect theft of Venezuela's national resources. It's also quite interesting that Juan Guaidó, the senior partner at the legal firm, Arnold and Porter, that's representing Juan Guaidó in the UK, previously represented the brother of Honduran president, the drug trafficking brother of Honduran president Juan Orlando Hernandez, and was basically lobbying representatives in the US House of Congress not to prosecute this drug kingpin from Honduras, which is quite absurd. And now he's representing Juan Guaidó. His name, Eli Whitney Debevoise. His father used to be a CIA asset. So you can see the kind of links between Juan Guaidó and his legal representation in the UK and what's actually going on in this case. But aside from that, the British government, as I revealed last year, and I think it was in March 2020, I revealed that the British government, or the British Foreign Office, had a secret Venezuela reconstruction unit that was headed by the former British ambassador to Venezuela, John Saville. Now, this unit that was preparing for a hypothetical coup in Venezuela and preparing for Britain to restructure its economy in the aftermath of this hypothetical coup, had never been referenced publicly before. It was totally secret. No governmental documents referred to it whatsoever, and the Venezuelan government was shocked and appalled at this. They claim that they hadn't been informed about the existence of the Venezuela reconstruction unit whatsoever, and they called the British Charge d'Affaires Hill to come and answer for the British government. And this quite obvious evidence of British involvement in the coup in Venezuela was totally ignored throughout the entire media, even though it provoked a diplomatic scandal, even though it was referenced at the United Nations, even though the Venezuelan government brought a complaint against the British government at the United Nations, even though Richard Bergen asked a question about the Venezuela reconstruction unit in Parliament. It's been almost comprehensively ignored throughout the media, which I thought was quite amazing, really. And it's quite rare that you get, a diplomatic crisis to that degree that's so comprehensively ignored by the media.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is what you reveal in your article is emails in which the surprise that the media is embracing Guaido with such relish, it kind of makes it quite clear how slanted the situation is. Could you tell us a bit about that kind of support that he was receiving in Britain?
I think that's quite well reflected by the fact that the UN Special Rapporteur's report on Venezuela was totally ignored. No, almost nobody reported on the entirety of the press. However, in these conversations, you've got Juan Guaido's UK representative, Vanessa Neumann, basically discussing with her team that the visit's getting gangbusters. They say it's getting incredible press coverage. I think in the documents you can see that they've organised an exclusive with the Financial Times and a number of other media organisations. At this time, the Guardian's Tom Phillips and a number of the other other journalists at the Guardian were kind of representing Guaido as this freedom fighter, who's gonna finally bring democracy to this to Venezuela that's under this supposedly crushing dictatorship. So as is usually the case, there's a direct correlation between the media's concern for humanitarian issues in the country and the UK and the US's intention to bomb it. So the media starts to become concerned about humanitarianism. If you're in that country, you might start to get concerned that you're going to get invaded or there's going to be some form of coup process against you. And you can actually see this if you're doing a Google search term. So I Googled humanitarian and Venezuela. There's a massive spike in January 2019 when those two words appear all over the media. Humanitarian concerns are suddenly top of the agenda in Venezuela. Didn't exist, barely existed, let's say, in the early 1990s under the neoliberal period with the Caracazo and whatever else when, Venezuelans were being murdered for protesting and whatnot. These were not concerns during the late 1980s and early 1990s, let's say with the Caracazo, or the neoliberal period where poverty was incredibly high and government repression was also incredibly high in Venezuela. But since the UK and the US didn't want to orchestrate a coup there, widespread concerns in the media about humanitarian issues didn't exist. So you can see, and I mean, it's the inverse is also the same. Let's say in Colombia or in Chile recently, there were massive protests, major repression, but there were no calls within the media for, let's say, the fall of Piñera or the fall of Ivan Duque, because this doesn't complement the US and UK foreign policy agenda.
I also understand that following this brilliant story, you were personally tweeted by Juan Guaido's personal representative in the UK. What did she say?
Yeah, so the backstory of this is a bit convoluted, but I believe it was a Friday evening, and the Venezuelan opposition, I believe that day, if not the day before, had just won the first round of its case in the UK courts regarding the Venezuelan gold. So they just won the first case at the High Court, and it was a Friday evening. And a tweet comes from Vanessa Neumann, Juan Guaido's UK representative. She tweets out "Muerte a Maduro," death to Maduro, with a picture of Maduro. I screen grabbed this, and then I tweeted out that a Venezuelan diplomat, well, a supposed Venezuelan diplomat representing the Venezuelan opposition, is tweeting out, death threats against the foreign head of state. Is this any way for a diplomat to act, especially a diplomat that is enjoying not full recognition from the British state, but had certain privileged relationships with the British state, such as private meetings to discuss British foreign policy, for example, with our Foreign Minister Alan Duncan. So shortly afterwards, Vanessa Neumann claims that her Twitter account has been hacked, and that it wasn't her that actually tweeted it. So bear in mind, it's a Friday weekend evening, and the Venezuelan opposition has just secured an important court battle in the UK. Now, I don't want to speculate, but it seems to me that the most likely eventuality is that she wasn't hacked and that she tweeted this herself and then made up that she was hacked in order to, provide cover. However, so I screen grab this, I share it, people are sharing it, they're like, this Venezuelan diplomat shouldn't be doing this, whatever. And the next morning I wake up to these absurd tweets from an account called Asymmetrica. Now, Asymmetrica is interesting. She's the director of Asymmetrica, but according to the company's registrar in the US, Asymmetrica is also owned, or was also owned, by two CIA officials, one of whom was behind creating the drone Predator campaigns across during thousands as part of the war on terror. Company that's owned by, it's supposedly a risk management company owned by Vanessa Neumann, connected to the CIA, that starts tweeting the next day saying that myself and a number of other journalists are now subject to a transnational FBI investigation. Totally absurd threat, linked to another tweet that says, "with a price on your head." So these are really, it came across to me, and it came across to the others involved, as a very thinly veiled death threat, which is absolutely shocking behaviour from a supposed diplomat, especially a diplomat that's enjoying this privileged access to the British government. So I emailed the Foreign Office and I said, do you maintain recognition of this woman who is threatening British journalists in Britain? And the Foreign Office basically washed their hands of the whole situation. They said this is from a private account, even though it's clearly Vanessa Neumann tweeting from behind it. Said this is a private account, so it has nothing to do with us. So I think realistically, the Foreign Office was incredibly embarrassed by the actions of this diplomat. And I mean, she eventually resigned from her role anyway, because she saw the direction of travel of the Venezuelan opposition. They were much further from power than when she was appointed. And yeah, so she's somewhat out of the picture. But yeah, I mean, it was quite a disgusting event, really, to receive threats like that from someone who enjoyed privileged access to the British state, and the British state decided to do nothing about it.
Wow, what a story. I mean, also, John, your work seems to have put you in the position where your freedom of information requests have all been rejected since you exposed this reconstruction unit for Venezuela within the UK Foreign Office. You've also done a subject access request at the Cabinet Office and found that your name, over a period of 18 months, was referenced 3,863 times in Cabinet Office internal emails. Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with the difficulty with freedom of information requests. So in the year or so since revealing the existence of the Venezuela Reconstruction Unit, I've sent a number of freedom of information requests trying to demonstrate that the British government lied when it said that the Venezuelan government were told about the existence of this unit. So one of those freedom of information requests is now it's been delayed by over a year. And the statutory requirement for response is 20 days. So at the moment, there's something like 350 days delayed. It's totally absurd. I've also requested information about internal discussions within the Foreign Office in response, or that mention Vanessa Neumann's threats against British journalists. That's been delayed for a large period of time. And there must be about 20 or 30 different freedom of information requests that have all been rejected. For example, about Transparency International's operations support that are funded by the British state in Venezuela. The Foreign Office would not be transparent about what it's doing with Transparency International in Venezuela, which is just makes a mockery of both Transparency International itself and the British Foreign Office's apparent, dedication to transparency. So I was having a number of issues gaining information via the Freedom of Information Act. Recently, Open Democracy revealed that there was a secret clearinghouse within the Cabinet Office where basically ministers or civil servants can monitor who's sending freedom of information requests, whether they're a journalist, and therefore whether they plan to publish that information, especially information that's sensitive or damning to the British state or embarrassing, more like. So I started to suspect that I might be on this clearing list. You have to give your name. However, it's supposed to be a blind process. They're not supposed to respond based on who you are. They're basically supposed to treat everybody equally. However, it's become clear that they've got a list of journalists that they've effectively blacklisted from releasing information to. So I submitted a subject access request to the Cabinet Office. What this means is that you have a legal right to see whatever information a government body or a public body has on you. So last week, I asked them to specify exactly how many times my name had been mentioned within internal communication at the Cabinet Office. And I actually forget the number, but you said it at the start. It was something like 3,800 times. They've referenced my name over a fairly short period of time, which is, it's slightly creepy and it's just quite absurd as well. Recently I published roughly one article a month. It's totally disproportionate to my output. And as an addition to that, I know they monitor tweets as well. I asked them, were any of my tweets included in this? And they said whatever tweets are included, they're included in that number. So they wouldn't specify the degree to which they're monitoring a Twitter feed as well. So you've got this really creepy situation where the government is monitoring journalists, is collecting data on journalists. What that actually is, it's hard to tell because they've got so much of it. They can't go through it to give it to you. It's the signal of a receding democracy, really, when the state is collecting that much data on journalists and is refusing to, it was refusing to provide information to journalists that is their legal right.
Wow. Again, there's so much that we could have to talk about. But when thinking about Britain's operations around the world, the Information Research Department was really key to all of that. Could you just give us a definition of what the Information Research Department is?
Yeah, so the Information Research Department, the IRD, was a fairly massive department within the Foreign Office that functioned secretly throughout the Cold War. It was active between 1948 and 1977. And it was involved in a lot of the British government's more sensitive areas of foreign policy in the name of anti-communism, but also to target any threats to British interests as the years went on. So how would the IRD function? Basically, it collected strategically useful information and distributed it to influential figures within societies abroad, but also within Britain. So it was also launching propaganda operations in Britain. So these figures in these influential figures were often the military, people in the church, the press, student bodies, and definitely the armed forces. So the IRD was operating all over Latin America during the Cold War. It was operating all over the world. My particular area of knowledge of research is Latin America. So it was involved, for example, in the kind of efforts to delegitimize Salvador Allende in Chile during the 1960s. Now, as many people know, in 1973, Salvador Allende was the subject of a brutal military coup at the hands of Augusto Pinochet. And during the 1960s, the IRD was basically providing useful information to journalists and to trade unions and to a number of different influential organizations within Chile to prevent Allende from coming to power. And it's quite clear why they wanted to do this. Allende oversaw a fairly systematic change of the Chilean economy. He nationalized, for example, the domestic and foreign-owned copper industry, and copper was its largest export. Britain bought a lot of copper from Chile. He also democratized the workplace. He nationalized 90% of the country's banking system. He broke up the massive farming estate. So Allende's economic reforms directly affected, in a number of ways, British direct capital interests. However, simultaneously, the symbolic threat of Allende, of the avowed Marxist who came to power via the democratic process, was a symbolic threat to Britain as well. If this process could be replicated across the region, then they'd be in serious trouble, serious material trouble, especially. So during the 1960s, the Foreign Office's principal strategic and commercial objective in Chile was to prevent Allende from coming to power. Once Allende won the election in 1970, the IRD collaborated with CIA outfits as well as a number of other US government bodies to continue to delegitimize Allende. And then, as we know, the Heath government recognized the Pinochet regime shortly, within days of it coming to power in 1973. There are a number of threads that continue with British involvement in Chile. So during the new Labour government in the late 1990s and 2000, the Labour government was actually in power when they refused an extradition request from Spain, so that Pinochet could be prosecuted for war crimes in Chile. At this time as well, the UK Home Office was paying Pinochet's legal costs. Now, what you've got today is, so formerly, you had the British government was protecting Pinochet from facing justice for war crimes and was paying his legal costs. Now, today, the British government is trying to extradite Julian Assange for revealing war crimes and is paying the legal costs of the prosecution. So you can see how the British judicial system could be gamed, in line with British foreign policy. On the 48th anniversary, actually, of the coup in Chile, the Chilean president, the current Chilean president, Sebastián Piñera, was actually in London meeting Boris Johnson. Piñera's presided over some of the worst repression of protests in Latin America over recent years. Human rights, of course, were not on the agenda because, in part, Britain is supplying the Chilean police with, anti-protest material, and Chile remains, an important regional ally of Britain. So, of course, human rights were not on the agenda.
Thank you so much for joining us today, John. There's a lot more that we could talk about. I really think it's vital that people support your work and also support the Canaries' essential work. Also, until next time, this has been Lowkey on The Watchdog with investigative journalist John McEvoy. Thank you.